I'm Laura Zeifer-Powell, Islam Ministry Specialist with Women in Apologetics. I teach WIA's self-led online course, Islam Foundations. This course will equip you to have effective conversations with Muslims as you learn what Islam teaches, what types of questions to ask your Muslim friends, how to respond to the most common objections to Christianity raised by Muslims, and much more. Islam Foundations contains 20 video lessons, as well as 8 bonus videos with other Islam ministry specialists and former Muslims from all around the world. And all can be viewed at your own pace as many times as you want for 1 year from the time of purchase, with the option to renew access. The course also includes study guides for each lesson to print out and keep. It is our hope that this course will equip you with the knowledge and the understanding you need to boldly enter into conversations with Muslims and to defend the truths of Christianity in a biblical and Christ-honoring way, and to do so with confidence, with effectiveness, and with joyfulness.
Hey everybody, happy February and welcome to Voices of WIA. This is our monthly interview show where we interview female apologists from across a wide variety of fields of knowledge. And it's brought to you by Women in Apologetics, an organization of Jesus-following women who desire to equip you to deepen your faith by learning to defend it with confidence. If you are new to our show, we are so very glad that you are here tonight. And we love to hear from you. So be sure to put your comments or questions in the chat, and our moderators will either respond to you themselves or they will forward your questions to me so that our guest can respond to them. If you are following us on social media, then you already know that February is all about learning to love God with our minds. And tonight's guest is a tremendous resource for helping us do that. We are so happy that she is here. Kathy Gibbens is a homeschool mom, a business owner, a Bible study creator, and podcaster who learned about logic and critical thinking skills when her daughter had to read about them for an assignment. And she found it so much fun to learn about all of the whoopsie daisies of bad thinking that were everywhere. And that launched her website and podcast called Filter It Through a Brain Cell, where she teaches you about logic and critical thinking so that you never get fooled by foolishness again. Kathy, I think that what you are doing is one of the most important skills that we as Christian parents and Christian people need. So I'm so glad that you are here sharing it with us tonight. It is going to be a great conversation, and I have been looking forward to it for a really long time. So everyone, please welcome Kathy Gibbens. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us tonight to help us with this very important task of loving God with our minds. How are you this evening?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm doing great. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, me too. It's going to be such a blessing. I'm so looking forward to it. So before we dive into the particulars of what exactly it is you teach and how you teach it and all of the intricacies of all of that, can you just tell us and our viewers, how did you get started teaching logic and critical thinking, and what results are you seeing in the lives of the people that you've been teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a homeschool mom. My husband and I, we have one daughter. She's 15. She's in 10th grade right now. But when she was in 7th grade, she was in 7th grade during the 2019-2020 school year, right?
Mhm.
So in the middle of that school year, that's when the pandemic hit and everything closed down. And then, of course, that year was the start of the internet fact checkers and misinformation. And then we rolled into a presidential election and all this stuff, right? So 2020 was a hot mess. And what was so interesting is in the middle of that school year, my daughter, with the homeschool group that we're with, one of the books that they had to read was called The Fallacy Detective. And these 7th graders loved it. Like they ate it up. It was all about logical fallacies, which I didn't know what that was. I had never heard of this stuff. I didn't learn this when I was in school. It was totally new to me. So I was learning it along with them, and I saw how quickly they got it. And as soon as they understood it, they started recognizing it everywhere. They would call me out. They would call their parents out because like they just got it. So what was really interesting was watching these kids, this little group of 7th graders, go through all the craziness of that year of 2020. And the thing that I noticed, I was like, oh my goodness, these kids, even just having being taught a little bit, like there's a whole scope of, critical thinking that's out there, and they just got a little bit, but even with the little bit that they got, you couldn't fool them. They would recognize in the messaging that they were hearing, they could name the fallacies. They could say, well, that's a red herring and that's an ad hominem. And the result was incredible because they didn't go on the emotional roller coasters. I felt like their mental and their emotional health was so much better because they could recognize bad thinking when they were confronted by it. And so it didn't affect them. And then watching the political elections during the presidential campaigns was hilarious. Like we would do bingo. They would do bingo with all the fallacies and mark it off. They could call it out every single time, and they always filled up their cards, right? Because those debates are full of them. And so, and I just reflected on that year. I thought, oh my goodness, if more people in our country had these skills of good thinking, we might not be in the place that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, this is my contribution to the world. So I started a podcast. I wanted them to be super short, fun little episodes that parents could play in the car on the way to soccer practice with their teen and have a conversation and learn about good thinking. And so I did. I'm really burdened for this next generation. I'm really burdened for them in the world that they are growing up in, for the world that they are going to have to raise their families in and live in. And I feel like we have to equip them with tools to be able to do this well. We have to equip them with tools to be able to recognize foolishness, to recognize truth from falsehoods. And I feel like it's the foundation for apologetics, because if you can't recognize that somebody's thinking bad, how are you going to refute that? How can you argue with it if you don't even recognize that somebody is making an error in thinking or that there's bad reasoning there? So that's how it started. It's kind of taken off from there, but we're just having fun with it.
I love that so much. I love that you mentioned that their emotions and their mental health seem to even out, because truth, it makes sense, doesn't it? That truth will do that for you. Truth will hold you steady when the rest of the world is falling apart around you. So that's so, so important. I love that. Okay, so with that in mind, what is logic and critical thinking? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I like to keep it super simple. So when I say
Great.
critical thinking, all that means is the ability to think about the things that you're hearing and to recognize errors in thinking. That's it. We all make mistakes. Everybody does it, right? So this isn't something that we can point fingers and say, "Oh, that group or that group." We all do it because,
Mhm.
just unknowingly, especially when we haven't learned this. So critical thinking is just recognizing bad thinking, and then logic is just being able to form good arguments. So very simple. And there's a couple different types of logic. There's formal and informal. I really just focus on informal because that has to do with how we think and how we communicate.
Okay, that's great to know. Okay, that also makes it sound very simple and kind of user friendly, kind of
It is.
unthreatening, which I think is really important because I think that may be one of the reasons some people maybe aren't as sometimes interested in it or they get scared off by it. So I love that definition. I think that's really good. Okay, so with that in mind, what are the different thinking errors that people commonly make? Which ones do we really need to be aware of because they're out there a lot?
Yes. Okay. So there's three that I like to talk about. The first one is a fallacy or a logical fallacy. And again, I know it sounds like big words. Don't let it fool you. A logical fallacy is all it is an error in thinking. That's it. It's just somebody made an error in their thinking. The second one I talk about, and that's going to be coming in season 2, is cognitive bias. And a cognitive bias is just a limitation in our ability to think objectively. And here's the thing, everybody think, oh, bias is so bad. We all have bias. We all do. Like, it is just a thing. And the reason that we have bias is because we see the world a certain way. For instance, I'm a Christian. I'm a wife. I'm a woman. I'm a mother. I homeschool my daughter, right? There's just certain things about me that affect how I see the world. And so everybody's going to have one, but if we can be aware of it, we can maybe question it a little bit and make sure that we're thinking well. And then lastly is propaganda. And propaganda are just tactics that are used to manipulate people mentally and emotionally. That's it. I keep it super simple. Those are the three biggest types of thinking errors that we see.
Okay, I think those are really helpful. First of all, to know that logical fallacies are sort of everywhere. And so rather than being afraid of them, we should actually look for them and expect them because we get better at noticing them if we're not afraid to call them out. Is that a fair assessment?
100%. Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. And then as far as cognitive bias, you're right. People use that term as though it's some sort of kryptonite, that people can't get around it. But if I understand what you're saying correctly, it's very similar to that. If we all are aware that our cognitive biases exist, then if we're aware of them, we can set them aside and work around them. Is that correct?
You got it. Yep.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. I think that's really important. I think a lot of people aren't really familiar with those terms or with how they kind of work and how we can navigate through them. So, okay. So then the next question I think is really important because you touched on it yourself, and I'm sure lots of people are asking this question already. Why don't we learn critical thinking skills in school? Because it seems like to me, if we go to school to learn to think, that's a great place to learn critical thinking skills. So do you have an explanation for us as to why maybe some of us didn't learn that in school?
Yes, it's actually a really fascinating and kind of sad history. I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit sad how it got taken out because this used to be part of education. It used to be taught in education. It still is in certain places, but not in most. Here's what happened. So back in the 1800s, the country of Prussia, which is kind of where Germany is at now, the way that their economy operated is they very much operated off of their military. They were a military superpower and they would rent out their army to other countries who were at war and they would win, right? They were really, really good. So much so that their economy was very dependent on this whole war machine that they had. Well, in 1806, they lost a terrible battle to Napoleon, and the King of Prussia was like, oh no, this is not good. We can't have this. If word gets out that our army doesn't win, our economy is going to tank. So they did a study. They figured out what had happened. Why did we lose? And what they found was that the soldiers were picking and choosing which orders they were going to obey and which generals and leaders they were going to listen to. In short, they were thinking for themselves. they were making their own decisions. Well, in the military, you really can't do that. My husband's former Army, and they had a saying that was salute and execute, meaning if you were given an order, you don't think about it. You don't get the choice to decide, I wonder if that's a good idea or if I should do that. You just say yes, sir, and you go execute. So they said, well, we can't have this because our whole economy is going to crumble. So he got a task force together to say, well, what do we need to do to prepare the children of Prussia, essentially, so that by the time they're of age that they're going to enter the military, they will follow orders without questioning. In other words, they won't think for themselves. So guess what they created? They created what they called a conveyor belt style education system that we now know as kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth, fifth. And they designed it so that by the time the kids were done and they graduated and were ready to go into the military, they would not question orders. They would be good soldiers. They would be good workers. They would be good factory workers. They would be good employees, but they weren't going to think for themselves. They removed everything that had to do with that. They were told what to think, not how to think. Well, it was a success. It worked. And so countries from around the world sent people to study what they had done. And Horace Mann is the person from the United States who went and studied and brought it back to America. And the people here did not want it. In fact, there were parents who showed up at the Massachusetts school with guns saying, we don't want this style of education. They understood what it was. And of course, we know how that turned out. And this is how we got our American public education system. So it was purposely taken out at a certain point so that they could develop people who could not think for themselves, who just didn't have the ability, and who wouldn't. I think we all have the ability, but if you're not taught how, you just don't tend to do it. And so I know for me, I had a great education. I went to a private Christian school. I didn't learn any of this. It just wasn't part of the curriculum. I think there's some schools out there who still teach it, but there's not many, and it's just not part of what we do.
Okay, that's a lot. Let me recap really quickly. So you're saying that our public education system, as most of us know it, just the public education system that's in your neighborhood elementary, your junior high or high school or whatever, that's actually based on a model of the Prussian public education schools?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's a really interesting history. It's just kind of interesting to dive into it and read about it, about how did we end up with what we have and what is the purpose of it and the point. And that's kind of where it started.
And the whole point was basically to at least limit or contain the students' thinking so that they didn't come to independent conclusions. Is that kind of a fair assessment?
They wanted people who were told what to do, who, when told what to do, they would do it. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's fascinating. Yes. It's sort of scary, but it's really fascinating, actually. Okay, so this question isn't in our official list of questions, but I'm just going to toss it out and see what you think of it. So as Christians, it seems like to me, since Jesus is the truth and God always speaks the truth, people who can determine the truth, that's really important to be people of faith, is to have the skills to determine the truth. Yes?
Yes. How else are we going to do that?
Right?
You know, and I feel like it's one of those things that we are taught to do in scripture, but we don't know what that looks like, right?
Yes.
You know, if you go back to Proverbs 25:2, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter and the glory of kings to search it out. So it's part of how we're designed. Like God created, right? He spoke it into existence, and now it's our job to discover the truth that he's created. You know, we have Matthew 22, where Jesus says, thou shalt. Like, this is a commandment. This is not a suggestion. This is not a nice idea. This is a commandment. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. What does that mean? How are we supposed to love God with our mind? If you go back and you look at Proverbs, see how many times truth and falsehood, wisdom, knowledge are mentioned, right? He's really serious about this. God is really serious about how he's created us in his image. He has created things for us to discover. And he said, of course, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. So it's not like we don't have to wonder, is there a truth? Can we know it? No, there is a truth. We're told that. Can we know it? Yes, we're commanded to search it out. So this is, to me, not the only way, but this is one way that we can do it. And I feel like a really foundational way that we can do that as well.
Oh, I totally agree. And what a great, now that we know this, now that we're thinking about this and discussing this together, what a great opportunity to pull that out of your back pocket when somebody says, oh, all we need is faith. We just need faith. We don't need reason. We don't need answers. We just need faith. Oh my goodness. Learning to think and pursue the truth is part of our faith because Jesus is the truth. What a great, somebody got free tonight from that. I'm just saying that's such a good observation. Thank you. I'm so, like I said, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. That was the coolest lesson. Okay, awesome. Okay, so it is time for already, I can hardly believe that we're at this spot already, but it is time for our book giveaway. So the book that we are giving away tonight at Kathy's request is a book called The Fallacy Detective. So I believe this is the same book that you used in your class with your daughter. Kathy, can you tell us just a little bit about what it is about this resource that caused you to recommend it?
Okay, so this book is perfect if you have a middle schooler, if you have a high schooler, that's who it's designed for. And it teaches, there's over 150 different logical fallacies that are out there, as I'm discovering, but this just takes kind of the most common 33 to 35 and it talks about them in a fun way. So it's just a very simple way to get introduced to logical fallacies and to start to recognize them, have fun with it. It's got a kind of workbook style, so it's got questions you can go through and answer, and it just is fun. The kids really enjoy it, and I just feel like it's an excellent introduction into informal logic.
And what a great blessing for your children to be able to teach them these and at least get them to think toward this end. You know, it's something that once we learn it, it's the kind of thing that we will practice forever and get better and better and better at. And so what a blessing to be able to actually kind of get started when you're really young and in a fun, age appropriate, child friendly kind of way.
Yes, and in that age group, you know, in the middle school, high school, anybody who's had kids go through that, you know, they love arguing anyways. They're at a stage where they are wrestling with ideas. They're wanting to think about things. They're learning how to think about things. Love to argue with anybody who'll argue with them. So I say, let's teach them to do it well. Let's teach them good thinking so that they can do this thing well and with excellence. So yes, it's a lot of fun.
Especially right now when there are so many falsehoods that are parading around as though they are true. This is such a handy skill. I could even see as a parent how this would help you because sometimes, and I don't know why it works this way, but it does work this way. Sometimes when mom says it, it has to be wrong. So if you can have the book, a fallacy detective book, tell you, look, this is the way the argument actually goes, and it happens to agree with mom, I mean, that's just a win-win, right?
You must have a teenager as well. Yes.
I've had a few of them. So yes. Okay. So you guys are going to love this book. I think this is a great resource for any teenager, but definitely for Christian kids who not only want to navigate their culture, but to hang on to their faith and to learn to defend their faith. What a great little resource this will be for them. So with that in mind, our winner for the book giveaway is, and so once your name is announced, just make sure you put it in the chat for our moderators, and they will get in touch with you on how to actually to receive it. But our winner is, she's watching us on YouTube, and her name is Briley. Briley, you are the winner of the Fallacy Detective, and I am so excited for you. Not only am I excited for you to read through this book and share it with your kiddos, but also I think you ought to teach them fallacy bingo. I think you ought to be able to learn. That'd be a great little game on the weekends to play with your friends and your kids, and is logic bingo, because there's lots of stuff going around these days that you'd be able to get lots of use out of that book and out of that game. So congratulations to Briley for winning our book this evening. So that's exciting. That's going to be fun. Okay. So you have talked a little bit about good thinking and what that looks like and what some of the fallacies are. Can you tell us now about the enemies of good thinking? What is it that we need to be aware of if we're going to really sink our teeth into this material for ourselves and our kids and our faith? What are the enemies of good thinking? What do those look like exactly so that we'll be aware?
And there's probably a handful of them, several of them, but I really like to just talk about two because I feel like these are the two biggest enemies to good thinking. The first, emotionalism. Right? We live in a society right now that has taught us that the most important thing about us, and the most important thing that we can bring to the world is how we feel, is our emotions. And everything is done in such a way to make us feel emotional, to make us feel angry, to make us feel offended, right? To make us feel all these things, to make us feel validated. And so when we follow our emotions, we physiologically it makes us dumber. Like, the science is really actually quite fascinating. The more emotional we are, the less able we are to think rationally. And so when we get emotional, when we let the propaganda and the messaging and all the messages of the world make us emotional, we are not able to think well anymore. It's, and like I said, fascinating science that happens in the brain. So emotionalism is number one. Number two is relativism. And I'm sure you guys, your audience knows this word, right? It's the whole, well, my truth is this, and your truth is that, and their truth is that, and everybody has their own truth, and what might be true for you isn't true for me. Everything is relative. There's no objective truth. And we have to ask ourselves, well, is that really true? Is there truth? Is there objective truth? And right, and as Christians, we go back to what scripture says, and Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. So there is a truth, right? And there is a truth that we can know. And so we have to really notice these things and pay attention to them in society, things that are working to make us emotional, and the relativism that, like, this is what our culture worships right now, emotions and relativism. And the thing about emotions is they change. Talk about being on shifting sand. Those emotions, as we all know, they will come and they will go and they will change over time. And so what kind of a foundation is that to be building truth on? Well, you can't. And that's why those are the two biggest enemies that I believe that we're facing right now to good thinking.
Yeah, I think you're right. I see those a lot. I see those everywhere. Is that because of what we've learned from neuroscience and the fact that what you were talking about, the science and the research being really fascinating with respect to the fact that emotionalism makes us dumber? I think it kind of it clouds our ability to think. Is that because of the neuroscience? Because when we get accustomed to thinking in wrong ways, it sort of lays down neural pathways that are incorrect. Is that basically what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but it's also part of how the brain is structured, right? So all input that comes in through our senses kind of comes in through the back of our brain, and we do all of our critical thinking through the front part of our brain. And so those thoughts, guess what they have to pass through? The middle part of our brain, which is where we process our emotions. And so we're kind of geared to have emotion, right? Like, we see this even in scripture. If you do a study on emotion in the Bible, there's a lot of it, right? It's all there. So what happens is, if we don't learn how to, this is why I think it's like scripture is so good. This is why we're told to take every thought captive.
Right.
Because otherwise, if we don't take the thought captive and learn how to think and learn the skills of thinking, those thoughts can just swirl around in that middle part of our brain where we're just all wrapped up in emotions. And that's not the scientific way to say it. This is my kind of interpretation of what right? But that's how it seems to happen in people, is things happen and we get caught up in our emotions. And if we haven't taken those thoughts captive because we know how to think well about them, we don't get it up here to the front part of our brain where we can think logically about it. And so, to me, take every thought captive is an active thing that we have to do, right? We're told to do this. This is something we're told to do. And I believe there's a reason that we have to do that, is because it's a choice. It's a choice that we get to make. It's an action that we get to do. And again, to me, that is also part of loving God with our mind. I'm not going to let my mind just go anywhere, dwell on anything, stay swimming in my emotions. I'm going to take those thoughts captive and learn to think well about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's kind of one of the undersold aspects of the Bible, is just how many verses talk specifically about how we should think, how God has instructed us to essentially manage our thought life, which we don't think about very often. Maybe that's something we need to address more precisely in our own discipleship and that of our children. But as you were talking, I was just thinking about all the verses. We're called to renew our minds. The world will tell us to empty them, but God says to renew them and reshape them. And then Paul tells us what to think on, what's true and lovely and of good report and beautiful. We're supposed to think on specific things and take all thoughts captive. And so, like you said, and so I just think that is part really of our spiritual maturation, is learning how to think in a manner that is worthy of the gospel and is worthy of truth and glorifies God simply by making the choice to seek truth above all else.
And so yes. And so much of what we see, I feel like in society goes right along with where in James 1, he says, if you lack wisdom, ask God.
Mm-hmm.
And then it talks about being double-minded and being blown and tossed by the wind.
Yes, you're right.
Well, look around at society. How many people, because they don't know truth, because they don't have a firm foundation, they're blown and tossed by the wind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every good idea or new sounding thing or thing that they're told that they should be enraged about or they should care about, they're just blown all over the place. And we don't have to live that way. And that is my heart, is like, especially for this next generation. I've got a daughter in this generation, and I'm looking ahead at the world that they're going to be in. And I'm thinking, we have to teach them to live well. We have to teach them to live well. And you can't live well if your mind's not right. And God cares about our mind. He cares what we do with that. And so to me, it's just a fun way to lay a really good foundation for solid thinking that a lot of their life will ride on.
Yes. Absolutely, especially when you consider that Jesus told us that that Satan is the father of lies. And so if we will pursue truth, we are much less susceptible to his traps and his schemes and the damage, quite frankly, that he can wreak in our lives. So speaking of all of that, can you share with us, sometimes, we learn just by kind of seeing what something looks like, having an example to look like. So can you share with us some examples of the bad thinking that you have seen in society today so that we can see it for ourselves?
Yes. Okay. So I just grabbed a couple. I have files and files of this on my phone and on my computer because there's no shortage of bad thinking these days. That is so, but I just brought a couple to share with you. So I want some good audience participation. So even if you're watching this later, put in the chat box. Okay. So I'm going to show you a couple of fallacies, and I want you to guess which one this is. Okay, imagine you're on your way home. It's been a long day, and your kid in the backseat says, if you don't take me through the Chick-fil-A drive-thru on the way home, I'm going to die. Okay, anybody want to take a guess? Go ahead. Just don't think too hard about it. Just guess. Is it post hoc? Is it either or? Is it a fallacy, or is it a red herring? And yes, all of those are real fallacies. Okay, so this is a prime example of, don't go yet. There we go. Stay on that one. That was a prime example of an either or fallacy. Okay, or sometimes it's called black and white thinking, black and white fallacy. It's saying it's either this, it's Chick-fil-A, or my death by starvation. Well, we have to ask, is that really true? Okay, or are there a whole slew of other options available? Number one, you'll be fine until we get home, right? Or number two, let's go home and eat the dinner I've prepared in the crock pot. Or number three, here's a granola bar from the bottom of my purse, right? This either or fallacy is made to seem as if there's only two extreme choices and only two choices. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So here's another one. This came out during 2020, during a lot of the race issues that were happening that year. Critical race theory lesson 1. Your grandparents identify with one of these two groups and have handed down their values. Take all the time you need with this. Okay, this is a doozy, right? You guys can see the picture here on the screen. Which fallacy do you think this is? Equivocation, ad hominem, no true Scotsman, or either or? And if you guess, hopefully you've got it in the chat box already. If you guess that this is an either or, you are correct. I love to show examples that seem kind of silly and easy, but then show real world what this looks like. Because critical race theory is all about there's only two kinds of people. You're either the oppressor or you are the oppressed, right? That's what that whole thing is founded on. That's an either or fallacy. And we have to ask, is that really true? Could there be other options? Were there any other kind of people here in the United States when all that was happening? And is it really true that even if your parents were the oppressed or were the oppressors, that is passed down and now you are that person as well, right? And now when we think about it that way, we can see there's all kinds of problems with this, right? This is not an either, there's not only two choices, but guess what? In society, critical race theory is being presented as if there are only two choices. You are either the oppressor or you're the oppressed. That's it, period. You can't be anything else. And it's not true, right? It's not true. Okay, let me give you another one. I've got another slide here. So this is Calvin and Hobbes, super cute. A bushel is a unit of weight equal to 4 pecks. What's a peck? A quick smooch. You know, I don't understand math at all. Okay, so this is super cute, but there is a fallacy here. Anybody want to take a guess as to which one it is? Red herring, equivocation, appeal to ignorance, or a loaded question? I'm going to give you just a second. Put your answer in the chat box. And if you said B, equivocation, you would be correct. So let me define equivocation. It's not really fair. You haven't been taught the fallacies. You don't know what these words mean, but it's just kind of fun. So equivocation is when you change the meaning of a word in the middle of a sentence or an argument so that it means something different, so that you redefine it. So in this example, they changed the meaning, or there's two meanings to the word peck. It could be a measurement of weight, or it could be a little kiss, right? And so it's funny, it's cute. Equivocation makes for good jokes and puns. But let me show you the next slide here. So in this example, this meme here, if you make fun of all races, including your own, does that make you racist? Okay, so over the last couple of years, I don't know if you have noticed, but I have noticed, there has been a fallacy that has happened around the word racist or racism these days. Would you say it's a weak analogy? It's an either or, circular reasoning, or equivocation? Feel free to put it in, before we begin. And this is another example. If you guess this is another example of equivocation, you would be right. The word racist and racism has been equivocated over the last handful of years. So if you're as old as me, you have seen it. It used to mean if you were a racist, what I was taught, you're racist if you treat somebody differently based on the color of their skin. Well, now, if you don't treat somebody differently based on the color of their skin, now you're the racist. And I don't know how many arguments I saw online between people who were arguing about racism, but the problem was they had two different definitions of what it means. And so we have redefined this whole word society has, and nobody really knows it, and they don't understand why. And if you have a conversation with somebody, if you can just get back and remember to say, well, let's just define this word, and you can just start there, what a difference that makes in a conversation.
And just as you're going through those examples, how helpful it is to see actual examples held up against the definition, because I think a lot of people are thinking, I didn't know what that was called. I've known that there was something not kind of right about that, but I really didn't know it had a name or a classification. So just to see it helps so much. So that's great.
Yes, and that's the beauty of it, because so often, this was me before I learned these things, before I'm like, well, that doesn't seem quite right, but I'm not sure why. I don't think I can articulate it. And if you can't articulate it, you can't address it, right? And so now just getting the verbiage, just having the words and getting the verbiage, you can instantly recognize, and I'm telling you, kids pick this up faster than we do. You can instantly recognize it and call it, and now you know, okay, now we need to correct this, and you know how to correct it because you know the error that was made, and it makes a huge difference.
Yes, I see that. That would make a huge difference. Just as you were talking, I was thinking, you know, if you can't name it, then it would be difficult to replace it with something better and more accurate if you can't really figure out what exactly has gone wrong. So yeah, that's really helpful. Super helpful. Okay, so the next question is, tell us the connection between critical thinking and apologetics, which we kind of touched on earlier, but let's go ahead and unpack that for our audience.
Yeah, so you probably are able to see it already, right? By the time we get to this question, it's like, it's there, you're going to see it. And it all goes back to apologetics is the defense of our faith, right? It's saying why we believe what we believe. It's defending against people who are, you know, trying to poke holes in it and question it and all that. It's knowing what we believe. Well, how are you going to defend against an argument if you can't recognize the argument? You might be like, well, it doesn't sound right. And it's not what I believe, but I don't know even how to respond to this person. I don't know the problem with, right? If you don't recognize it, you can't address it. And so for me, I just know for me, even though I have learned different things about apologetics, this was like a connecting piece. It was almost like a foundational piece to be able to recognize the error in thinking that they were making. So then I could pull off my shelf, right, of what I had learned and what I knew to be able to address that. So to me, it was a very foundational thing. And I feel like for kids as they're learning, right, I kind of learned this backwards because I was in my 40s when I learned it. But for my daughter, now she has a foundation of good thinking, and anything we put upon that is immediately usable because they can pull the shelf and they can use it right away because they know exactly where it would go. They know exactly, oh, this is the problem here. I can address it with this. So for me, it's one of those things that they go hand in hand. It's just a foundational tool, and it makes learning apologetics, and it makes the defense of our faith, it makes being ready to give an answer for the hope that's within us just easier because we have some tools.
Yeah, exactly. It's equipment. It's like gear. You would go to soccer practice with soccer gear. You'd go to baseball practice with certain things for baseball. So if we're going to defend our faith, we have to have tools, and that just works. Okay, so this is a really great question. I'm really interested in this question, and I feel like most of our audience will be too. How can parents teach their children this skill if they never learned it themselves? I think a lot of us are going to be really intimidated by this subject. So help us out. How are we going to do that if we've never learned it ourselves?
Yes. Well, and honestly, the answer to this question is exactly why I started my podcast. I thought I want to make this super easy and super fun because it was intimidating for me. So number one is get the book, The Fallacy Detective. It is a great introduction. It's a fabulous introduction into learning the fallacies. But honestly, I didn't feel like there was a ton of tools out there that were available, at least that I knew of. And so that's why I listened to the Filter It Through a Brain Cell podcast. That's the name of my podcast. They're super short. They're literally 5 to 10 minute episodes. Listen with your kid. Here's the thing. Parents always think that we have to be the experts. We think, oh, I better learn it all first, and then I can teach my kid. And I say, no, learn it together. Do this together. Like some of those side-by-side conversations, shoulder-to-shoulder conversations are the sweetest and the most beautiful. So turn on the podcast, listen to an episode, and then have a conversation about it. To me, that just keeps it super simple. You're not adding extra things into your life and into what you're doing. So anyways, I just want to invite anybody to check out the podcast because it is designed to be a tool for parents to learn alongside their children. And that's what it's for.
So kind of along the lines of like a project that you would do together. If you were going to go, make a project for school, or if you were going to go hunt down a certain set of things for a birthday party together, it's kind of, you have made it or attempting to make it essentially a project that parents and children could do together. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a jumping off point for conversation, right? Because I feel like we want to have these conversations with our kids. We want to be the one that is, creating the file in their brain for how they're going to think about certain things. And so when you can listen to something together and you have examples, it's an easy way. It's an easy in for the conversation. Oh, what'd you think about that? Have you ever heard that fallacy? Right? Do you recognize that? Have you ever done that? Have you heard me do that? And now you are in a conversation, even if it's short, it's still creating a file, right? It's still creating that file to give a good foundation for how they're going to think and how they're going to see the world.
Oh, I think that's great advice. So very helpful, honestly, and fun too. Who knew this could be fun? I mean, I'm into all things nerdy, so I think it's fun. But however, it sounds like this book in particular and your podcast as well in particular are designed to make this kind of thing, thinking well, fun. And wow, that's really important. That's a good combination. Really good combination. Okay, so far I have at least one question from our audience. And this is a cute question. I like this. I'm anxious to hear the answer to this. Our questioner wants to know if Kathy has a favorite fallacy. Is there something that you have learned specifically that you are so glad you've learned it? What is your favorite fallacy?
Okay, I do have kind of a favorite because this is one that I just learned recently and it tickled me. It made me laugh so much. So there is a fallacy called the if by whiskey fallacy. And this was coined after a man. He was a politician from Mississippi, and his name, I'll never forget his name. His name was Noah Sweat, but his nickname was Soggy. So his name was Soggy Sweat, right? Go figure. And that's kind of appropriate coming from Mississippi, I feel like. But it was during the age of prohibition, right? And people were asking him, what do you think about prohibition? And so he apparently spent quite some time writing out this speech. And in this speech, he's like, okay, I never back down from an issue. If you want to know what I think about prohibition, here it is. If by whiskey you mean, and I'm going to just shorten this significantly here, if by whiskey you mean that terrible drink that destroys souls, destroys families, and destroys men, then I am against it. But if by whiskey you mean that beautiful drink that brings families around the Christmas tree and brings money into our state so that we can feed the orphans and take care of the children, then I support it. And that's what I think about whiskey. And it's so funny because he totally talked to both sides of the issue, and he supported both sides of the issue. So this if by whiskey fallacy was named for people who speak to both sides of an issue because they don't want to lose support, and they won't take a stand on one or the other. And the speech is so funny. I read it in the episode because it's fairly short, but it's hilarious. And when you know how to think about it and you're like, what is happening here? He's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. It just made me laugh. So
yeah, that's really cute. And I've never heard of that one. That's a new one on me. So I love that. I think that's really interesting. And you know what? We see it all the time. We see people pulling that all of the time. So how handy it's going to be to be able to say, oh, wait, I know what that is. And by definition, being a logical fallacy, it can't possibly be true. So I love that. That's super helpful. Okay. So another of our questioners wants to know what your thoughts are as far as how early and at what age we could start having these conversations with our kids. What ages do you think they would begin to understand it enough to pick it up? At what point should we get started?
I would say elementary. I think we can just start with our kids when they're young, just by asking, well, is that really true? Like, this is the question I mentioned in every single episode. Is that really true? Right. And so you can just kind of talk your kids through things when they're young. When they're getting into 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, they're ready for this. Like, they are ready because, like we talked about, they argue, they want to get their point across, they want to do this, and they love this information. They love knowing this. So definitely by those middle school years, they are ready for this information. And in high school, I feel like this is a skill that is needed before somebody launches out into the world, right? So I feel like what you do in the elementary years might be a little bit different. You might not necessarily be naming everything and telling them exactly what the names are, but you can just practice asking the questions. Is that true? Right. And just get them to think. It kind of will start training their brain. And then in those middle school years, give them the names, teach them the names of all of them, teach them what they mean, show them examples. They will get it and they will enjoy it.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think not only about, segmenting the ages and kind of making it as age appropriate as possible, but at the very least, wherever we are as parents, not only asking them, is it true or is this true? But also just reiterating the value of truth. What is a true? What does the truth look like? And what does a lie look like? And what happens when we don't stick to the truth? There are certain things that if we wander from the truth, we might actually hurt ourselves or someone else. We can see other people. We can point out times in other people's lives where they followed a lie and suffered for it. And so even if we don't get all the way to the point of logical fallacies with our little kids, we can still teach them the fundamentals of the nature of truth and what it looks like. And I think that's what you're saying, is if we can just help our kids understand the value of truth at those younger ages, then detecting the truth and sleuthing the truth is something that will come naturally to them a little later on.
100%. Okay. When we put that in the brains, it will be in there and they will get it. I just want to say real quickly, I just saw in the comments there, my actual website is filteritthroughabraincell.com. If you go to kathygibbens.com, you'll get a Bible study that I wrote. This one, but the website for my podcast is filteritthroughabraincell.com. And you'll
that's good. That's good. That's really helpful. Okay. So, we had another questioner was curious about the fallacy detective, and she wants to know, is it just a book or is there like a curriculum available, and where could someone purchase it if they were interested in getting that material for themselves?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of different places that you could purchase it from. Amazon is going to have it. Most Christian bookstores are probably going to find it. I don't know that they have a specific website that they got it from. I'm pretty sure I just ordered mine from Amazon. So they have The Fallacy Detective, and then the same authors also wrote another book called The Thinking Toolbox that could be used afterwards. So I don't know that I would call it a curriculum, but it's just a fun book that you can go through that's going to introduce the good thinking. So
okay. And so likely at any of your typical online booksellers or even brick and mortar booksellers, or most of them it's going to be available at most of those places.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Do you happen to have, for those of us who are not children, maybe some of the parents are like, I want to go check this out for myself. Do you happen to know of a resource for adults that would be still in that user-friendly category, but something that we could maybe, it's maybe a little bigger in scope? Do you happen to know right off the top of your head if there's something for the moms and the dads out there who want to kind of learn a little bit about logic?
I do not have a resource. There are books out there. However, here's what I have found is that, I don't know if you guys have found this or not, but it seems to me when people don't believe in God, one of the things that they put in the place of God is they put their intellect and they put their reasoning. When somebody's an atheist, they tend to put their mind and their reasoning in that place of God. And so one of the things that I have learned is a lot of people in the adult critical thinking space are atheists, or they're very anti-God. They do not have a Christian worldview. And so there may be resources out there that would be something that I would be interested in reading and recommending, but I have not found it yet. So for me, I just say, check out my podcast. This is a great book as well. I have not seen something for adults that I would feel comfortable recommending because, again, their worldview slips out. It slips into it. Their bias slips into it. And it just is not something that I feel is truth. So anyways, yeah, I wish I had a better resource to mention, but I don't.
Maybe that's a project for women in apologetics.
There you go.
Especially for moms, created by women, for other women, for Christian women. That might be a really good project for us to take on because you're right. I know that I didn't take logic and philosophy and critical thinking in high school. I remember hearing about it in college. Somebody was taking a class on it in college. And I remember being interested in it, but something happened and I never got around to taking it. And so it wasn't until I started studying apologetics that I even got introduced to logic and critical thinking. And so once you begin to kind of learn and be able to recognize some things, it really is super practical and helpful. And what if it made us, because I kind of suspect that a lot of us don't enter into conversations about culture or enter into conversations about our faith because we don't really know where they're going to go. We don't really know how the other person is going to respond, and we don't know how to engage compellingly with objections. And so many times we just don't say anything. And so I would think that it would give us a great deal of courage when you have some confidence that what you know is true and that you can explain why it's true. Have you seen that in the lives of your students, in the lives of your family, and in possibly even yourself, that once you have a little bit of certainty that you at least know what you know, that you can speak a little more clearly?
Yes. And it's really interesting. So my daughter's 15 years old, and this has been one of the things that it's been so fun to watch her use these skills, right? Because she has friends that aren't Christian. She has friends that don't see things the way that we see them. And she has relatives, right, that don't see things the way we see them. And so she gets into these conversations and she's not afraid of them. I remember at her age, I didn't have this training. And I remember exactly what you're expressing here. I remember being afraid of getting into these conversations for that exact reason, because I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know how to answer them. And I was afraid it was going to get to a place where I was going to be stuck and where I was going to feel silly and I wasn't going to know what on earth to say. But I noticed she doesn't have that. So she has a basic confidence that comes from, well, I know how to think, and I know whatever they give to me, I'll know how to think about it.
Yes.
Right? That's that whole schooling difference of, there is no shortage of people in this world trying to tell us what to think. The real skill is, do you know how to think? Because when you learn the skills of knowing how to think, it doesn't matter. Give it to me on this topic, give it to me on this topic, on this topic, on this topic. You will at a minimum know how to think about it. And that makes a difference. It makes a difference in your confidence. It makes a difference in your ability to engage. And even if you can't answer all the questions, you do know how to think about the questions, and you can kind of boil them down to, okay, what is the person really saying here? Okay, they're saying this. Well, is that true? Right? And having the ability to think through something like that makes a huge difference.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. I'm so grateful that you mentioned all that, because I think that's very true. And you used a word, you don't want to feel stuck. I think a lot of people feel that they don't want to get stuck. I think that's a great way to describe that. And our moderators just popped, if you're joining us and you're looking in the chat, our moderators just popped in a link. It turns out that WIA does have a resource called 12 Logical Fallacies. It's on our webpage. Under resources, click free resources, and we have a list of 12 of them. So that will get you started working on logic and critical thinking skills from a Christian perspective. So that will be helpful to everybody. So I'm sure you, let's see. Oh yes. And then they also gave me your website. It's filteritthroughabraincell.com, correct?
Yes, that's it.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. So that's where you guys can find Kathy and her work on teaching kids, both the podcast and the website, teaching kids about, and parents, logic and critical thinking skills. So Kathy, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. This was a great conversation, a very practical, timely, needed conversation. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, because I think this is a great contribution to the kingdom. And I'm grateful that you're here sharing with us tonight.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh gosh, I loved it. Thank you so much. Well, you guys, we are already at the end of the interview. Thank you. I'm sure you enjoyed this interview as much as I did, but I think this is super helpful and super encouraging that we can teach our kids to navigate the world that we're in simply by helping them to think critically about all the claims that are being made, and what a glory it is to Jesus himself, who is the truth, if we can teach them how to seek the truth for themselves. So before we go tonight, I want to remind you that our annual conference is coming up this June. It'll be the weekend of June 9th and 10th in Anaheim, California, for those who want to come in person. However, you can attend virtually. We are featuring some fantastic speakers like Natasha Crane and Holly Pivik. So please follow us on our socials so that you can stay updated on all the information as the time grows closer, and on registration details. So in the meantime, be sure to follow Kathy at her website, filteritthroughabraincell.com, on her podcast and her socials. And you can find us at Women in Apologetics on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. So thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. It has been a pleasure. Have a great evening, and we'll see you in April for our next Voices of WIA.